I was struggling with what to teach today because I've taught so many things, and some of them I've taught multiple times, that I was really struggling to come up with something that I could teach and would be fairly short, in meaning under an hour. And about midway through the day, it just kind of hit me that as I've been teaching, some of the things that I have talked about are improvements that have been made to the Azure Portal. But I've not ever, other than in a blog post, in a video blog post that I wrote, have I ever really focused on the interfaces that Microsoft provides and some of the things that are available within those interfaces. And I bring that up because over the years, I have worked with different customers, and certain times I've been kind of hand-holding a customer through a process, and I would tell them, well, go here, and they would be like, what are you talking about? And the specific location that I was talking about was a basic feature of the Azure environment, and to me is something that every single customer who is going to be leveraging Azure should absolutely use. So I thought that would be a good thing to teach today. So we'll be doing a how-to on the Azure Interfaces. And I say Azure Interfaces specifically, not to only focus on the Azure Portal, but also Azure Cloud Shell as well, which some people don't even know exist. So we'll be talking about both of those, some of the common features that are available in the Azure Portal, things that I think that every single person who leverages Azure should know about. Let's go ahead and jump into the Azure Portal. I am going to go to portal.azure.com. Anyone who uses Azure should absolutely know what portal.azure.com is. Even developers who primarily work against the SDKs still should have an understanding of what the Azure Portal is. And this is the base interface. And let's just start from the top down. I think we understand what a search box is. We don't need to talk about that. You can type in, it's a full text search. It's going to give you responses not only for the resources and resource groups that you have deployed, but also the ability to create new resources. If, like, for example, I type in the word network, I see here under a list of services that I could actually create new services based on that word network. Now, if I had any resources that had the word network, those would show up in my listing under the resources category or the resource groups category. So pretty straightforward there. The Microsoft Azure link is just a quick home button. I think that's pretty straightforward as well. We've got, of course, our navigation here on the left, and this is completely customizable, or at least it was. If I click on one of these, or not click, but hover, you'll see that there's a star here. That star lets me know that it's been added to my nav bar. That's actually what makes this customizable. Every single user will have the ability to add or remove items from this list based off of the resources or resource types that they use on a regular basis. And these are the ones that I already have. So for example, let's say I don't need to keep Azure Active Directory here. I am going to remove that. And there it goes. In order to add something to this list, we're going to go to networking, and then let's choose public IP prefixes. I hover over top of it, I get a little card that pops up, and then I can click on the star. This then pops it down to the bottom, and that's going to be the automatic action that occurs. To then move the public interfaces, and you can't see this easily because of the fact that I'm using the white theme. If I was using the dark theme, or actually I'm using the light, L-I-G-H-T, the light theme. If I was using the dark theme, then you would actually see that there are three little dots here, and that's what allows me to change the mouse icon. Now, what I'm supposed to be able to do is grab that, and you can see it puts a little box around the public IP prefixes, and then I should be able to move it up over any one of these. And I'm just going to drop it here. Bingo. Now, it didn't do it perfectly the way that I had it lined up. I was trying to fit it in between Resource Explorer and resource groups, but it got close. So you can obviously move things around as you see fit. You can also collapse the navigation and just get the icons. And you're going to be able to see that as we navigate throughout the Azure portal, that you're going to be able to do that with every blade that pops up. This piece of the screen is considered a blade. All right, let me go back to my home here. Let me go back to my top bar. We talked about search. The next icon here is Azure Cloud Shell. Now, what exactly is Azure Cloud Shell? Azure Cloud Shell provides you access to a command line interface where you can either leverage the Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell. If you click on this button, it's going to open it up here inside of your browser as a secondary iframe underneath of the portal, thereby allowing you to very easily copy and paste, for example, information that you need from a resource here in the portal when you then type in a command here in Cloud Shell. Now, what you're seeing here is that I've got my bash shell, which is what allows me to use the Azure CLI. I can click on this and there's the PowerShell, so I could actually use PowerShell scripting if I wanted to. What exactly is all Cloud Shell? Because it's more than just this command line interface. Hold that thought, hold that question. We'll get to that in a little bit. Because Azure Cloud Shell can also have its own browser. It doesn't have to be inside of this browser tab. I can actually open it up inside of its own browser tab by going to shell.azure.com, and it's going to authenticate me in the exact same way against my Azure Active Directory instance and give me access to the same command line interface. Keep in mind there is I believe it's a 20-minute session timeout window. So if you are not continually using it, you eventually will get timed out and you'll have to go through that reauthentication process. Obviously, that is for security reasons. So let me close this down and close this down, and we'll come back to Cloud Shell and talk about it in more detail in a little bit. Okay, up here is your most recent resource types that you've used. Down here are the most recent resources. Now, keep in mind that there is a caching mechanism behind this user interface. So you are going to run into situations where you've deleted something, yet it's still showing up in your list. Don't worry about it. It just means that it hasn't been cleared out of cache. If you click on it, get the error that the resource doesn't exist anymore, that will actually flush it out of cache and maintain then the list of what was remaining. Okay, back to the top bar. We go from Cloud Shell to directory and subscription, which this is what allows you, if you as a user have access to multiple customers, multiple directories, multiple subscriptions, you can specify your default Active Directory. You can also specify your default subscription to connect to when you log into the portal. This is for your user in your portal instance. Next is notifications. As you do anything inside of Azure, a notification is generated for that action, a create, an update, a delete, in some cases, listing of keys. There are a number of different things that can generate notifications. Pretty much any action will. When those notifications fire, they show up here. If I click on that, there is the only notification, which is how much money I currently have in my MSDN subscription here. But if I were to create something new, let's say a new resource group, and I'll just do this really quickly. As soon as this resource is done, which it's now available, there is the notification for that action. Next is your portal settings. This is where you can set your theme. This is where you can specify, do you want your default view to be the home view or the dashboard view? We'll talk about that in a little bit. Do you want to have your portal menu, the one that I just showed you, docked or fly out? I always prefer docked, mostly because that's what I've been used to, having been using Azure for quite a few years now. Specify your language and your region. Do you want to specify signing you out when inactive? And this is for security purposes. Some customers actually, this is actually something that can be controlled by Azure Active Directory. So your organization could have set a policy such that every single user automatically has it set to 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. I can tell you when I was at Microsoft, ours was set to 30 minutes. So we were if we were in the portal all the time, it was great. But if we happened to leave it in the background while we were on a meeting or talking to a customer, we would potentially come back to see a session timeout. And then also, do you want high contrast theme? So remember, we talked about the fact that I had a hard time seeing the little buttons or the little dots over here because I was using this light theme. Let's switch to, I cannot stand the blue theme, but the blue theme is the original theme of the Azure Portal. We click on the black theme or the dark theme. And we now, when we hover over, our little dots are much more visible, making it easier for you to find if you need to move things around in your navigation. So all of that can be done inside of your Azure settings. We then have help, just as you would expect in any good software product or products. Then the last is feedback, where you can actually fill out a form and send feedback. Now keep in mind, this feedback was designed specifically for portal feedback. If you want to provide feedback for a specific feature or service, then that's where you're going to go to roadmap.azure.com and you can actually request certain features. You can also go to the Azure forums and put in certain feedback there, and those are actually tied to the individual engineering groups that work on those features or services inside of Azure. Last thing on this top bar is your username and directory. If you hover over it, you're going to get information about exactly who you logged in as, what the tenant ID is of the directory that you have authenticated against. Okay, let's go back to our home. Now, remember, I talked about in the settings, choosing your default view, home or dashboard. Well, as you can see, this is my default view. This is my home. What's a dashboard? Well, a dashboard is a way to pin information that you find relevant to a screen that you design. So, right here under my home button in my navigation, I have a dashboard. And by the way, these top 4 items before favorites, every user has. Create a resource, home page, dashboard, all services. Everybody has those 4. So we click on dashboard. What this now gives me is a set of blocks. Now these blocks are going to show information of things that are occurring inside of my Azure subscription. They could be a list of all resources like you're seeing here. They could be a CPU percentage metric that you're gathering from one or more VMs that you happen to manage. They could be pretty much any blade that you see in the Azure portal can be pinned to your dashboard. Dashboards are resources just like anything else, but they are tied to a specific user rather than to a set of subscriptions. That being said, there are also dashboards that can be created that can be shared. And you make that decision when you create the dashboard. So if we look here, up here at the top, I am currently showing my dashboard number 4. If I click here, you'll see I've got 3 other dashboards, one called dashboard, one called my dashboard, 2 and 3. You, of course, have the ability to create new ones. As you want to pin something to a dashboard, the portal will ask you which dashboard do you want to pin it to. Dashboards are JSON objects, which means that someone in your organization could create a dashboard that already has information that he knows is going to be relevant to you. You're part of the networking team. You need to have information at your fingertips related to the networks that have been deployed or networking resources that have been deployed inside of Azure. They can send you a JSON file. You can click on upload and you will automatically have that dashboard available to you, and it will be configured to pull information from your subscription based on what's in that JSON document. If you're building a dashboard, you can download it to a JSON document. Now, let's say, for example, and let's add something to this page first, and then we're going to continue down this path here. All right, so let's go to Azure Monitor. Now, remember I said that you might want to add metrics. So let's click on metrics. and we're going to open up this public IP address. Maybe. There we go. Why can't I select multiple resources? Oh, wow, they're actually allowing you to provide feedback directly into here. So this is new. This is the first time I've ever seen this. So I already know what it refers to, so I can talk about it even though it is new. Remember I talked about roadmap.azure.com. That's where you can actually request new features. If someone else has already requested a new feature, and by the way, they are categorized according to the different service categories inside of Azure: networking, compute, storage, and so on. If there's a feature that you find interesting or that you would like to see, then you can actually add your vote to it inside the roadmap. That's what's happening right here. They're doing the same thing with respect to the portal UI, but they're giving you the opportunity to upvote directly here inside the portal rather than you having to go to roadmap.azure.com. All right, so we have chosen that particular IP address. Then we select a particular metric. Inbound TCP packets, DDoS. Now there's not going to be anything here, mostly because this particular IP address isn't being used. But this is a metric. This is something that I can add to my dashboard, and you'll notice pinned to dashboard. You're going to see that option all throughout the portal as you navigate. So if there is a screen or a piece of data or a list of data that you need to see on a regular basis and you want to save yourself some time, pin it to your dashboard. So I'm going to sit here and pin to current dashboard is perfectly fine. Now we go back to our dashboard, and there it is pinned. Now, I don't like it here. Don't like it here at all. Let's edit. The edit is a simple drag and drop scenario. Well, first of all, I do not need quick starts and tutorials. So let's just go ahead and remove that. I don't need the Azure Getting Start made it easy. So let's get rid of that. What I do want though is I want this up here front and center. These are just boxes, so we can easily drag them around into our different boxes. We also can change the size of this. Right now it's 4x2. Obviously we have other options here, and of course we can remove it from here. We can also click on Done Customizing. So let's go ahead and click on Done Customizing. Nice and simple, very straightforward. If you are creating a dashboard that you want other members of your team to be able to see, you can click on the Share button, go to full screen. We can clone it so that you can actually create one that already starts with these particular blades. We can delete it, we can refresh it. Very, very straightforward, simple stuff. So let's go back to home and let's go to any particular resource. Let's go to that same IP address. All right. What you're seeing next to the navigation is what the Portal UI team and I call a blade. As you work within a specific resource, as you need to configure a resource, whatever it might happen to be, the blades will change, or you will get additional blades, sort of like breadcrumbs, attached to your resource. Now let me see if I can get this to work. Unfortunately, no, I can't. I chose a bad resource. All right, let me go back to my resource group. By the way, there is a breadcrumb up here. If you noticed, as I was clicking around, let's go to a little bit more of a complicated resource. Yeah, let's go to the virtual machine. Okay, you'll notice that there are now scroll bars next to different areas for this resource. Depending upon the complexity of the resource, this is what's going to happen. The navigation is now considered a blade, and this area here is now considered a blade of this virtual machine. Also, this overview page has a number of boxes here with a little pin button up in the top right-hand corner. You can click on these and add these to your dashboards. As I said, you're going to see this all over the Azure portal. Now let's go to networking and the network interface. You'll see that we've got a breadcrumb up here. We're inside of the network interface. This is just another blade. I click out of here. I go back to my virtual machine. What I was looking for is it size? Every once in a while, and I'm trying to remember a good place where this is going to be true, you'll get a pop out that will come out of the right-hand side. That's just another blade. So as you move into resources, as you jump around from resource to resource, because you are following a trail of thought, you're just going to get new blades. And then you work within those blades, you remove one, you go back up the breadcrumb trail. Hopefully this is all making sense to you. Okay. Okay. The last thing within the portal. And remember I mentioned that I was working with a customer and I asked him to go to a specific location within the Azure portal that I felt that he should know, because it's just a standard location. What I was referring to is up here on the top of the navigation. No matter which resource type you're working with, anything, doesn't matter what kind it is, every time you get one of these blades that has a nav for that resource and an overview or display area for that resource, these items up here at the top will always be there. Every resource has them. Overview, straightforward, just gives you an overview of the resource, the information that you provided during creation, during configuration. Activity log is your audit trail. Everyone should know about the activity log. It was one of the biggest features that I thought was made available at the time, and this has been 3, 4, 5 years ago now, but it's extremely important, not only from a perspective of security, compliance, and things like that, but also for you as an individual user of your Azure subscription to be able to do troubleshooting. So if you get an error message up here in your little notification section that something errored out, something didn't work the way that you expected it to, the notification box is only going to show you so much information. Well, how do you get a more detailed error message? That's where the activity log comes in. Because when you click on the activity log, you're going to get information about the actions that are occurring inside of your Azure subscription. Now, I clicked on it from within my VM, which means it automatically filtered that activity log for actions that occurred with respect to this VM. If I want to look at activity log at a holistic level, then I'm going to do that inside of Azure Monitor, because that's going to start at the subscription level. But activity log will be found every resource type right there on the top left-hand side. Access control, this is where you can set roles and permissions. Once again, something that every user needs to understand. However, you only need to understand it from the perspective of understanding what permissions you have. Now, if you are going to be one of the few people who defines what roles are created, what permissions make up those roles, and who gets them, then that's a different topic of discussion. But within most organizations, that's going to be a small number of people. Everybody else, the easiest way to determine what you can do is to click on the access control button here within the given resource that you're trying to do something in. And then you can do a check access. You can check your specific role assignments. You can look for any deny assignments, or you can just look at the list of available roles. Now, this is going to be very specific to you. You're only going to be able to see what you have access to. So as, of course, your level of access goes up, the more you'll be able to focus on. Right now, though, I'm going to be focused on only what I can do within the scope of this particular virtual machine. Next is tags. This is where you can actually either create or update tags that are assigned to the specific resource. Once again, available for all resources all throughout the portal. And then lastly is diagnosing and solving problems, looking for any specific problems tied to this particular resource. And this list of common problems is going to change depending upon the type of resource that you click on the button for. Anything underneath of these top 5 will be different depending upon the type of resource. So this particular resource, the virtual machine, has a large list of available settings that can be modified. However, at the bottom of the settings list, every resource will also have these 3 items. The properties, which is just a quick view of metadata associated with this particular virtual machine, and it's going to be different depending upon what resource you're clicking on as far as the list of properties are concerned. Any locks that have been associated with this particular resource. So when I say locks, you can either set a read-only or a delete lock. So for production level resources, someone who has the access would potentially want to set a delete level lock on those resources to make sure that a system doesn't go down because of someone accidentally deleting them. And don't think for one second that I haven't seen it done. I've never done it myself, knock on wood, but I've absolutely seen it done. I've had many customers crying, not literally, because that did in fact happen. So if you're having a hard time deleting a resource, making an update to a resource, and you're not sure why, another way to do a quick troubleshoot, other than looking at the activity log and seeing what the activity log tells you, is take a look and see if there are any locks that have been associated with the resource you're trying to modify. Last is export template. This is where you can get a ARM template extract of the resource group that you're looking at, and then either use that for reuse in maybe another region or parameterize so that it can be reused for multiple people in different ways. This is very handy. I'm going to give you one big caveat, however. As someone who has been creating ARM templates for 6 plus years now, ever since the language was created, what is made available here is very prescriptive. They do not do a very good job of parameterizing the template according to best practices or according to even a organizational standard that most customers would employ. So you still are going to have to do, more than likely, some editing of that ARM template when it gets extracted. In addition, there are also some values or properties that are exported that are not relevant to someone who is trying to make a consumable ARM template. Now, if you're just exporting it for source code control purposes, you're great. But if you're trying to create something that's going to be reused or developed against or things like that, you're still going to have some work to do after you do the export. But this is also available every resource group. Okay, let's now switch back to Cloud Shell. What exactly is Cloud Shell? Behind the scenes, Cloud Shell is 2 things. It is an Azure storage account, and it is a Azure container instance. What that means is Microsoft has been making available a container that can be deployed on demand, basically when you click on the button or you go to this browser. That container instance is then connected to a storage account that gets created the first time you spin up Azure Cloud Shell. And if we go back to my portal, I'll actually show it to you. Here it is right here. The first time you try to run Cloud Shell, the very first thing that will happen is it will try and create a storage account inside of a resource group called Cloud Shell Storage and then the region designation. And then it just gives a very generic or a randomized name for the storage account. Why would you need a storage account? You might say, if I'm just going to be running commands. Because this is a container. That container will also have other things on it other than the CLI or other than PowerShell. And because you're running scripting, you might need to be able to store things in files. Well, how would a container that's continually being run and shut down have access to files? That's where the storage account comes into play. So the minute that the container comes up, it has access to this storage account for file storage. I don't know if I have anything in mind. Let's see. Yes, I do. So Cloud Drive is the default folder that's created when the container is initiated. And that Cloud Drive does have its own container inside of the storage account. But you can also create your own folder structure based off of files that either you upload or you also have the ability to do Git. The container comes loaded not only with the Azure CLI, not only with PowerShell, but also with a number of common tools that those of us who do scripting might need to have access to. So, the Azure Orphan Audit folder that you're seeing here, I actually brought down from my GitHub repository. In order to do that, I of course had to do a git clone. Okay, here's the documentation page that lists out all of the available tools. Here we go. So we have Bash, Zshell, Shell, Tmux, Dig. We then have the Azure CLI. We have AZ Copy, Azure Functions CLI, Service Fabric CLI. I don't know what Batch Shipyard even is, or Blob Xfer for that matter, but I'm guessing that's Blob Transfer. You actually can bring up Visual Studio Code, and it will automatically open code with the directory that you're currently in, and I'll show that to you in a little bit. But you also have access to Vim, Nano, and Emacs for editing purposes as well. Git, I already talked about, it's installed. Build tools, so if you're doing any kind of compilation as part of your testing process or development process, you can use Make, Maven, NPM, or pip. Access to the CLIs related to containers, Docker, kubectl, Helm, and DCOS. Clients for connecting to databases, MySQL, Postgres, SQL CMD, and MS SQL Scripter. And then we also have a few others: Terraform, Ansible, Chef, Puppet, HashiCorp's Packer, and the Cloud Foundry, as well as Python and the Cloud Foundry CLI. All of these tools are available inside of Cloud Shell and can be started right from the minute the Cloud Shell comes up. Hence the reason for the storage account, because if you're going to be using any kind of, let's say, a build tool, then you're going to need to probably use Git to bring code down in order for the build tool to actually work properly. If you're building a container image, then you need to have the Docker CLI in order to be able to do that. Or if you're building Helm or Kubernetes configuration files, YAML files, then you're going to want to have the kubectl so that you can actually then connect and validate your YAML file that's stored on your CLI or on your Cloud Shell against your Kubernetes deployment. You get the idea. Now, I talked about VS Code. Now, this is not fully fledged VS Code as if you were running it on your machine. You don't have the ability to deploy extensions. It is a base instance of VS Code. So let's do a code right here. It opens it up at the top, and we're automatically in a blank location. All right, let me close this. Let me do the exact same thing again, but I'm going to do it with the package JSON. Opens it up in editing format, and we can make modifications as we see fit. You do have the right-hand scroll bar, so that you can make it a little bit easier to scroll down. But as of right now, you do not have access to a folder tree on the left-hand side. You don't have access to extensions. You don't have access to a terminal. But then again, why would you need a terminal when you have the terminal right there in your Cloud Shell? So all of this is available as part of Cloud Shell. And I'm very much from the school of Scott Hanselman. I prefer to do things via the CLI and via code than doing it inside of the Azure Portal. Now, I say that with the knowledge that I've been working in Azure for close to a decade. I understand, with the exception of new resource types or new services, how to do networks, compute, storage, app services, functions, all these different things because I've been doing them for a long time. If there is a new service, though, that I want to work with, I always use the Azure Portal because it gives you so much visual information about that new service, and I do that until I'm comfortable with the service. Then I start to learn the Azure CLI commands so that I can make things run faster via scripting. Because as great as the portal is, if you're going to be doing something 20 times, you're not going to want to be pointing and clicking 20 times in the Azure Portal. Just something for you to keep in mind. So with that, I'm done talking about the Azure interfaces. One thing I did not talk about is the Azure mobile app, which there actually is an Azure mobile app. It's quite good. I actually have it deployed on my iPhone. And it does give you the ability to perform many of the functions that you would want to do easily on your mobile machine. Now, if you are going to be in there every single day, probably not the best use of working with Azure resources. But if you just need to look up something, do a quick validation that the CPU is where it's supposed to be, validate an IP address, and you're sitting in a meeting, don't have access to your laptop, then your phone absolutely will help in those kinds of scenarios. And it is directly integrated with all other Azure Active Directory authentication that you're performing on your phone. So if you happen to be authenticated for Outlook or anything along those lines, then that will automatically help transfer. Same thing is true for MFA. If you happen to be using or your organization is using MFA, all of that can be tied in together as well. So hopefully this has been valuable information for you. I'm sure some of you have been doing this for quite some time, so it's not new. But maybe I did show you something that you weren't aware of.